that will be substituting for Deputy Corran. Before we begin, can I remind members and witnesses to turn off their mobile phones. Privilege. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege with respect to the evidence to give to a committee. This means that witnesses have full defence and defamation action fronting said a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and remind of long-standing parliamentary practice effective as is reasonable, no other comments should be made as against either identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence from a location outside the parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as the witness giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts and may consider it appropriate to take legal advice on this matter. Privilege against defamation does apply to publication by you outside proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. The purpose of today's meeting is for the committee to examine the implementation of the Irish Inshore Fisheries Sector Strategy 2019 to 2023. The committee will hear from Charlie McConalogue, Minister of Agriculture, Food and Marine. The Minister will be accompanied by the following officials: Sinead McSherry, Assistant Secretary General Marine Division; Geraldine O'Donovan, Assistant Principal Marine Division; and joining remotely Suzanne Brennan, Principal Officer Marine Division. You are very welcome to this evening's meeting. And now the Minister 5 minutes to read his opening statement, and then we'll proceed to a question and answer session. Okay, Minister.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach, and thanks to the members for the invitation today to discuss the implementation of the strategy for the inshore fisheries sector 2019 to 2023. And in 2014, Cathaoirleach, 6 regional inshore fisheries forums and the National Inshore Fisheries Forum were established in order to provide a platform for dialogue between the sector, defined as vessels under 12 metres in length, and also the state and other stakeholders operating within 6 nautical miles. The development of the strategy for the inshore fisheries sector was initiated by the National Inshore Fisheries Forum in 2017, and its purpose was to set out their vision for the sector. While my department and Board Oireachtas supported the development and implementation of this strategy, it is important to note that this was very much an industry-led strategy. The strategy was published in 2019 and represented the first time the inshore fisheries sector developed and set out its own aspirations and objectives for the future of the sector. The majority of fishing vessels registered in Ireland are inshore fishing vessels under 12 metres in length. There were 1,642 such vessels on the National Register at the end of December last year, representing almost 88% of the total number of vessels registered in the Irish fleet, which was 1,868 vessels in total. However, based on sales notes and logbook declarations, we estimate that approximately 1,000 of the 1,642 inshore vessels are actively fishing. The remainder are likely not to be engaged actively in fishing. Given their size, however, inshore fishing boats represent 10% of the registered fishing fleet's gross tonnage capacity as of December last year, and 31% of its kilowatt capacity. Inshore fishing boats accounted for 9% of the landings by volume by Irish fishing boats into Ireland in 2023. Implementation of the strategy has been led by Board Oireachtas, Ireland's Seafood Development Agency, in partnership with the National Inshore Fisheries Forum and the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, or NIFA. My department supported the implementation process, as did the Marine Institute, the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority and other agencies. I understand that implementation of the strategy began following its publication in 2019. Board Oireachtas formed a strategy implementation group to monitor and drive the implementation process. And that implementation group included representatives from the National Inshore Fisheries Forum, as well as the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, and from relevant state bodies as well. As such, industry has had an integral role to play in the successful implementation of the strategy. The implementation group held a number of meetings at which the members agreed on several issues to be progressed as priorities, including the development of an inshore sector profile, building the capacity of the sector to engage with policy development, and increasing the sector's understanding of inshore fisheries management. Unfortunately, as deputies are aware, COVID-19 pandemic began to affect Ireland in March 2020, and at that point, BIM's focus necessarily shifted from strategy implementation to dealing with the impacts of the pandemic and its consequences for the seafood sector. Additional challenges to the sector arose related to Brexit and the start of the war in Ukraine, and responding comprehensively to these issues was a priority for my department and BIM and other marine agencies. I understand that while the activity of the implementation group was technically paused during these crises, this does not mean that the engagement with industry stopped or that actions set out in the strategy were not progressed. My predecessor, Michael Creed, and I continued to meet inshore sector representatives through various other avenues, as did department officials, including structures such as the National Inshore Fisheries Forum and the Seafood Task Force. As such, there was ongoing engagement between my department, BAM and industry throughout the period from 2020 to 2023. Funding in excess of €11.4 million was provided in direct payments to inshore fishers, those under 12 metres, vessels under 12 metres in length, under both the European Maritime Fisheries Fund and the Brexit Adjustment Reserve funded schemes over the lifetime of this strategy. Actions set out in the strategy continued to be progressed both by BAM and by my department. For example, the strategy focused on improving the facilities available at piers and harbours used by inshore fishers. During the lifetime of the strategy, local authorities and marine infrastructure projects received more than €45 million in funding from my department, and €7.3 million under the Fishery, Harbour and Coastal Infrastructure Programmes, as well as €37.8 million then under the Brexit Adjustment Local Authority Marine Infrastructure Scheme, or the BELAMI scheme for short. In the same period too, my department invested more than €139 million in the 6 fishery harbour centres it manages. The strategy also included an objective to improve the inshore sector's capacity to engage with policy and other issues important to the sector. During the period of the strategy, my department worked with the industry to enable formal recognition of 2 new producer organisations for the inshore sector that are now providing additional representation for the inshore fishers and giving them a stronger voice. The National Inshore Fishermen's Association is a PO focused on representing inshore fishers in terms of vessels up to 18 metres in length, and our most recent record shows it had 115 members as of the 1st of January this year. The Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation is a producer organisation dedicated to fishers from our offshore islands, and it has approximately 46 members. Another objective of the strategy to improve the management of inshore stocks was implemented through actions such as the development of revised protocol for opening potential new fisheries for wild bivalve molluscs, and this was developed with industry and published in November 2022. Other objectives were actively supported through schemes funded under the Brexit Adjustment Reserve and the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, such as lobster V-notching, completion of BIM's inshore census, business skills training for fishers, and also Young Fisher Scheme, which supports young fishers acquiring their first vessel. Bar funding of €1 million was also made available to Board BIA for inshore marketing schemes to promote sales of stocks of particular interest to the inshore sector. Looking forward, the challenges facing the inshore sector now, in many respects, are different to those in 2017 and 2018 when the strategy we're discussing today was developed. The National Inshore Fisheries Forum has already begun discussions in relation to the development of the new strategy for the sector. This will provide an opportunity to address matters of concern to the sector, and the inshore census conducted by BAM in 2023 will provide valuable information to inform this process. These results, along with other relevant and available data and evidence, will support us in clearly identifying the nature, scale and scope of the challenges currently faced by the inshore sector, and in identifying effective measures which will support the industry in adapting to these challenges. My department and Bord Iascaigh will be fully engaging with all representative groups in the inshore sector as this work has progressed. Funding will be available under the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund to support the implementation of relevant measures to support the sector in coming years. The inshore fleet is of significant economic, social and cultural importance to our coastal communities, and the sustainability and viability of the fleet must be at the forefront in considering the way forward and setting out a longer-term vision for the inshore fleet. Supports for the inshore fleet, both in terms of funding and services, are provided by Bord Iascaigh, which is the state agency responsible for the development of the seafood sector. And it works closely with industry and all of the recognised representative groups, actively supporting the development of the sector as a whole and the inshore fleet in particular. BIM will receive funding in excess of €22 million from my department this year to support its work. So I can assure you, Caoirleach and members that this is something that the strategy and the development of a new strategy is something we are very committed to supporting and to developing, and indeed to supporting the sector as we go forward as well. And I want to touch just as well, Caoirleach, on the particular challenges. The sector, it's been a difficult few months from a markets point of view, The sector has been under a lot of pressure. I've had a number of engagements with them over the last period of time around that as well, and I'm in the process of finalising a support scheme as well to support the sector this year from a markets point of view, particularly in relation to crab and lobster. Both markets are quite depressed. The volumes in terms of the numbers going to sale are down on what they'd have been, and indeed price is down, and it's significantly impacted on incomes. And listen, while we can't remove those market challenges that are in place, it is something that I recognise the sector is under pressure in relation to from an income point of view, and I'm just in the process now of finalising a support scheme to deliver some support to them this year as well in recognition of that fact. Thanks, Ciara.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Collins.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Minister, for your statement and the guests that are with you. You say here, Minister, that BIM works closely with the industry and all of the recognised representative groups actively supporting the development of the sector as a whole and the inshore fleet in particular. There has been no meeting, Minister, or contact with members of the NIFA regarding the implementation of the inshore strategy to this day. Exactly 1 week after the NIFA appeared on the joint committee here, a meeting was held with BIM. I think that was around 1 week, 24th of January was the meeting they had here. A meeting was held with BIM in their head office in Dublin. There has been no further meeting or updates from BIM since that meeting on the 31st of January. So I can't see how they're working closely if they're not haven't met anyone or spoke to anyone since the 31st of January, Minister. Have you any comments on that, Minister?
Well, listen, just in terms of some of the details I have here, my note in relation to in relation to meetings. So the Department and BIM have met with Inshore representatives on 29 occasions over the period of the strategy, Deputy Collins. I met with them recently, myself, NIF and NIFA and IMRO, the Irish Island Marine Resource Organisation, on the 18th of April recently. The Department also met separately with NIF on 2 occasions to date in 2024, and in addition online with NIF and NIFA and IMRO on the 7th of May 2024. I'm not sure when the last meeting between I don't have detail here in terms of when the last meeting between BIM and NIFA were, Deputy Collins. I don't have that detail.
In fairness, I won't question that. If you say the Department met, that's good enough, but BIM haven't met. And BIM, you were statement here saying BIM works closely with the industry and all the recognised representative groups, actively support development, the sector, and the inshore people. You'd expect that a meeting would take place since the 31st of January if they were actively communicating with the NIFE, one of the main inshore organisations, Minister. So I'm, you know, I think that statement is contradictory. Minister, as you're aware, every inshore crewman in Ireland have faced unprecedented hardships since COVID-19 to various market collapses with losses of at least 10,000 each since last November. Things have gotten much worse, with several processes closing their doors. When are you planning on giving financial aid to the inshore sector as they are struggling to keep their heads above water?
Yeah, I've had a number of meetings with them. It has been a very challenging time, Deputy Collins. This year, and particularly in relation to markets, and obviously over the last couple of years, there was wider challenges in the sector with regard to, as a result of Brexit. So last year and the year before, I would have run Brexit business adjustment schemes with significant funding. It was up to about €4,500 for boats over 12 metre and 2,700 for those under 12 metre. So listen, I've had a number of meetings with them this year to discuss the particular challenges that are there. And I'm in the process of finalising, so I expect shortly to be able to make an announcement in relation to a scheme which will support them this year. Obviously, listen, we can't make the market issues go away. They are there. Some of the signs on the horizon and some of the information I have is that, you know, over the months ahead, it looks like it may improve, but obviously that remains to be seen. But I have, in recognition of the challenge they're facing, been working with my team in relation to a potential support scheme. So that's something I hope to make an announcement on over the next 2 to 3 weeks, Deputy Collins.
2 to 3 weeks. I appreciate that because some of them are struggling severely, Minister, and you know, mortgages to be paid and banks knocking on the door, and they can't. There's a serious worry there. The rural independence brought before the Dáil Éireann a motion on the 25th of January 2023 regarding inshore fishing. They asked for a figure of 12 million at the time, because that was the figure that was well researched. And to this day, only 3.5 million was given to the inshore sector. The inshore sector now find themselves in a far worse predicament, with the pollock fishery also closing. The government at the time voted in favour of the 12 million. With the state of the inshore fishing sector now compared to January 2023, that 12 million wouldn't be anywhere close to a figure which would help. So are we looking at a figure, like, when you agreed to 12 million at the time, 3.5 million seems to be only given. Are you willing to, when you agree to a motion, are you willing to carry out what the motion said? 12 million?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, as you know, Deputy Collins, if you were to add up all of the motions that come before the Dáil and private members over the course of a year, you'd be doubling your national budget. It's obviously, we have thankfully managed the state's finance as well the last period of time, but it is at budget time, and it's the choices that you make in relation to that decides what funding might be available. But that's not until next October. But I am looking at the options available, because I recognise the need for short-term support for the inshore sector in the short term here. So I have been looking at options in terms of how I can facilitate that, and that's what I'm finalising the detail of at the moment. We would have worked closely with the sector, and obviously as part of the seafood task force, the inshore sector would have sat in that, as well as all other representative sectors of the industry too, and would have come forward with, I think it was 16 proposals for schemes across the sector, one of those being for the business adjustment scheme for the inshore sector, which I would have delivered all the other schemes too. But as I say, I am making final preparations in relation to a scheme for this year, Deputy Collins.
Okay, and I respect you're right in saying that you probably have to double your budget if everybody's requests were, given into. But you agree to that motion of 12 million. So if you agree to a motion, if you disagree, you're being honest and straight and saying, well, that money can't, and you can't afford it. But you obviously agree to that motion, and you've fallen back and have given the money. Celtic Sea Herring, NIFA asked for a seat on the Celtic Sea Herring Committee, as they have members involved in the fishery on the 13th of February 2023. The Minister said he is still considering. Can you confirm today if they have a seat on the Celtic Sea Herring Committee?
Yeah, that's something I'm considering, Deputy Collins. They've been in touch with me, and I expect to respond to them shortly, and that is something I'm considering.
Are you considering positively or negatively?
Well, listen, I'll tell them first.
Okay.
But I take on board your representations in relation to it as well.
I appreciate it. Minister, have you acquired any bluefin tuna quota for this year?
We don't have a national. It's something I've been pressing at EU level, Deputy Collins, and something I would dearly like to secure, and I raise it and press for it regularly at EU Council level. It's not something Ireland has a national quota for, though. So in order to secure a quota for it, we would need to have the support of 2/3 of other member states to be able to get a slice of it. Obviously, that's a tall order, because you're dealing with one pie. And if you get if you start to get a percentage share of that pie, it means that others' share of the pie is somewhat diminishing. So as you can understand, any change in quota at European level is difficult, considering you need 2/3 of the member states to vote for you to have it. But listen, it's something I continue to pursue. But this year, as in any previous years, we don't have a national quota for bluefin tuna.
Okay. With the ban on pollock, wind farms and the looming MPAS, inshore fishermen are now in a dire situation. Have the government ever considered providing an annual scheme like in the agricultural sector towards the inshore sector?
So listen, I mean, we work, like with the common agricultural policy, we work within a common fisheries policy at European level too. So that has never featured as part of the common fisheries policy, Deputy Collins. I do look to see where I can support it, though, and did over the last couple of years through the business adjustment scheme. But it's not a feature of the common fisheries policy in the way that it is of the common agricultural policy. We are looking, though, now very shortly. We'll be confirming the new schemes under the European Maritime Fisheries Fund for the next 4 years, which is the equivalent of the CAP as such in terms of our national plan. And we'll be looking to see how we can provide supports for the inshore sector as part of that.
Okay, and the closure of the pollock fishery, we say is a big blow to the inshore sector. And to add insult to injury, commercial fishermen who are now stopped from fishing pollock have to watch anglers take any amount they want. This proves the ban had little to do with conservation methods, Minister.
So listen, I mean, obviously the pollock is, it has been a real impact and a loss to the inshore sector in particular. The pollock fishery has been closed due to scientific advice to allow time to recover and strengthen again so that it doesn't get undermined. It has been closed right across in all of areas 6 and 7, which basically is areas west of Scotland, down the Irish Sea, across the south of Ireland, across the north of France and Spain, and across the west coast of Ireland too, for all commercial fisheries. There can be recreational angling for pollock, which is available to anyone, but only for recreational angling, not for commercial sale.
Okay, and the final question is, BIM run a scheme for re-notching lobsters. Fishermen are waiting for this to open since February. We're halfway through the year, and fishermen are still waiting. It's crazy the scheme doesn't run all year round to benefit the sustainability of lobsters.
Yeah, so listen, because we're between the old MFAF has finished, and I plan to, very shortly now, announce the schemes under the new European Maritime Fisheries Fund, including the V-notching, which has been a successful scheme in terms of conservation for the species, but also in terms of providing income. So that will form part of the new MFAF, Deputy Collins, and I expect to announce that very shortly now.
And can the scheme run all year round when you announce it?
It runs on an ongoing multi-annual basis once it's launched. It's the fact that we're between two schemes at the moment that we're now in a position looking to restart it again.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Deputy Collins.
Thanks, Cahirla. Minister, in your opening statement, you reported to us that there were 1,642 vessels under 12 metres on the National Register at the end of December 2023. And you then reported also that approximately 1,000 of those vessels are actively fishing. So that's 642 that are not engaged actively in fishing. So that appears to me to be leaving out a lot of information as to why that is the case and were they actively fishing at a certain point in time. So how many boats have left the industry or have stopped actively fishing since COVID restrictions were lifted? So pre-COVID and the war in Ukraine, you know, how many boats were actively fishing and how many are actively fishing now? And then linked questions, Minister, are what was the turnover of the inshore sector pre-COVID annually, and what is the turnover now in the last reportable year, which was obviously 2023, and then the volume of produce landed by the inshore industry. So I want to get a sense of the number of boats according to your department, the turnover and the volume. If you can just let me know what your assessment of that is.
Yeah. So listen, I don't have the specific drilled down detail there that you're asking for, Deputy McLaughlin, but I can get that. I can get my team to send that. Okay. For example, so there's that 1,642 inshore vessels, which are on the National Register, and then approximately 1,000 are actively fishing. But then if you look at it, say a good benchmark for where we might be at in terms of active fishing would be the number that would have applied for the business adjustment scheme that had run last year and the year before. To qualify for that, you had to show that you had 30 days active fishing, or else sales notes for more than €1,000 worth of fish sold. So that was the threshold for qualifying. And then the payments to fishers for that was, if you're an under 12-foot or 12-metre vessel, or 10-metre vessel, it was €2,700, and if you were under 18 metres, it was €4,700. So you would expect, obviously, anybody that could qualify to actually apply for that. And we had just under 800 vessels last year and the year before who would have applied for that, 780 or in around that mark. So that's, and the threshold for those, so that would be boats that had fished more than €1,000 worth of fish in the year, or had 30 days active fishing, one or the other. So that would give you sort of a threshold of how active, you know, that 800 boats would be. So any that were under that, obviously wouldn't have had €1,000 of sales or the 30 days active fishing. And again, because of the funding that was now offered, you would expect anybody that would have had it to apply.
The reason why I asked the questions is that the view of the sector would be there's a very significant decline in that period, and we just need to be able to measure that. So I appreciate you don't have the information, but if it could be sent on to me so we can just measure the scale of the problem, that's there. And of course, as you've acknowledged, the prices in terms of crab, lobster, right across the shellfish sector, it's quite devastating. So I would imagine it's even worse in the last while. In terms of the Oireachtas, as you've said in your statement, they have responsibility for the inshore strategy. And in fairness, there's a very detailed response from Oireachtas to the testimony of the NIFA representatives at a previous committee hearing. We have that here. But my understanding is the implementation committee last met about 5 years ago, just under 5 years ago. And I mean, to me, the best way you can really measure actions is to have an implementation committee. So is there any response as to why that's been allowed to happen? I appreciate they're drafting a new strategy right now, but you know, will there be a commitment to have these regular implementation committee meetings? First of all, is it correct that the last time that implementation committee met was in 2019? The date I hear is 25th November. And how is that going to be addressed moving forward?
Implementation committee. I believe the implementation committee had 3 meetings in 2023, Deputy McLaughlin. Obviously, things would have been impacted by COVID and also by Brexit. So, like, it's about 4 years ago now. This time 4 years ago, we were in the throes of COVID, and that was basically distorted, disrupted normal strategies and required specific responses. And then also alongside that period of time as well, both BIM and the Inshore would have been participating in the Brexit and the task force, the Brexit Seafood Task Force as well. So that would have been going on during that time. But so I certainly, as I said in the opening statement, there was significant disruption to the implementation of the Inshore strategy from COVID onwards, and the strategy was due to conclude at the end of last year, and there was 3 meetings then last year of the implementation committee, and we're now very much looking towards the development of a new inshore strategy, which would be our second ever. That one was the first.
See, in terms of the development of this new strategy, can it examine? Would it have the I suppose the permission to examine this issue of dedicated European funding? You know, Deputy Collins has talked about in the agriculture sector. Obviously, we have a form of subsidy in place through the Common Agricultural Policy over many years. There is measurable demands made of farmers, in fairness, in relation to environmental measures and so on. I mean, can this next phase consider a similar support for our fishermen all around the coast?
Well, listen, I mean, it'd be open to consider and propose measures that it feels should, you know, are appropriate in the strategy. In terms of what schemes within, let's say, in terms of funding, they would have to fall within the European Maritime Fisheries Fund and within the wider Common Fisheries Policy. And there's been a lot of consultation over the last number of months in the development of those schemes, which I plan to announce now in the next few weeks, and they'll run for the next 4 to 5 years. So it is open to consider, but it obviously has to fit in within, the same as with the Common Agricultural Policy, it has to fit within the overall agreed fisheries policy. So CAP, for example, the basic payment scheme within CAP, That's not unique to Ireland. That's across all 27 member states. And likewise, the different streams for many schemes, Pillar 2 schemes that would run would be the same across member states, and then the same for fisheries.
Yeah. I mean, you'll know that in relation to the issue like fuel subsidies, that government here was criticised for not bringing in measures that were brought in other European member states. Has your department carried out an examination of the supports available in other member states? You know, both looking back in recent times, you know, because obviously you've had profound market disturbance, you've had the COVID pandemic, you've had the war in Ukraine, which has had very, very serious impacts on the markets, huge market disturbance. So, I mean, if your department hasn't, can they consider what has been done in other member states, and can we replicate some of that in this country?
It's something we're aware of, and I'm aware of. I know over the last 2-3 years, some other member states would have had fuel subsidy schemes. It's not a route I chose to go down. We did do other schemes which weren't available in other member states, and which I felt, you know, which we very deliberately put in place to support the various sectors. That Brexit adjustment model scheme, when I just indicated that boats had to have been fishing at least €1,000 of fish in a year, or actively fishing for 30 days. That was one ran last year and the year before. It's not something that would have been available in other member states. And then also there would have been tie-up schemes as well available for those fishing quota species last year and the year before too. And again, that's not something that would have been available in other years. Now, there's no doubt that post the invasion of Ukraine, there was massive spikes in fuel, and indeed we put in supports for wider society as well in relation to those fuel as well, which would have been removed gradually over a period of time, where the benchmark sort of fuel prices now are right today, and just in the last short while, are similar and in line with what they would have been prior to the invasion of Ukraine. They're back to where that would have been. The heaviest part of the heavy fuel hikes would have been, you know, over the last year or two. But I think, just speaking generally in relation to the fuel subsidy, as a mechanism of support, once you start doing that, that's a very difficult process then to step away from, because fisheries become and maybe fishing would be taking place that's totally dependent on it, you know, it's a route which is a challenging one then to step away from, and I think other member states are finding that as well. That would have been going down that route, but we did do other supports instead. And particularly so the tie-up scheme for the Inshore that would have had quota species was a much more appropriate way to do it in my view, because the way that worked was 1/3 of boats could be tied up at any one time, but the same level of quota was available. So for every boat that was tied up, for every 3 boats, 1 would tie up, but the other 2 would go out and catch the full amount of fish. So they'd catch the fish that the boat that would have been tied up would have been fishing, but the boat that was tied up got paid for staying in harbour for that month. And then the next month it went in 3-month rotations. The next month then other boats would tie up. So it meant that you were going out and you were catching more fish, you had more income, which covered your costs, and it was probably it would have been a better way to address the fuel challenge at that time.
The difficulty, Minister, is that the tie-up scheme wouldn't have been available to the inshore sector, would have been available to offshore. So the criticism of the inshore sector is that in terms of the overall bar, and as you know, and you've responded to parliamentary questions, there was a significant amount of bar funding that had to be returned. But their argument is that they got a very small percentage of the overall bar fund allocation, and they were facing, you know, very, very serious challenges. A lot of things were happening. We talked about the pandemic, we've talked about Brexit, we've talked about the war in Ukraine. So there's just been hit after hit after hit on the sector. And fundamentally, I mean, I appreciate Bord Iascaigh felt the need, and that was the right to substantively respond to criticism. And it's, in fairness, it is a welcome and substantive response. But the issue, as you know, Minister, because you've engaged directly with the sector, is they're in real financial crisis. You know, I've never seen, it's not, they don't need funding or grants to upgrade their vessels at this stage, or well, they always need that, but they don't only need that. We're sort of beyond the point where you're looking for grants to upgrade the vessel or training or, you know, all of the things that would have been planned in the Inshore implementation or the Inshore, sorry, strategy and the implementation of it. As you've alluded to yourself, the whole landscape has changed dramatically, and we're now in the space where, you know, the sector is going to need ongoing, I think, subsidy, financial subsidy, per active boat. And I suppose I'm asking that's where we need to be here. That's the reality. And the reason why I asked about the information about, I mean, what was the volume landed, what was the capacity, what was the number of boats, it is very clear from speaking to inshore fishermen all around the coast, and I mean all around the coast, that we are in an unprecedented crisis here. You know, it's an existential crisis. And I just don't get a sense in the response to parliamentary questions and your evidence here today that is fully appreciated. And I think we need a swift response, a swift intervention. If this was happening in the agriculture sector, what's happening in the fishery sector, I don't believe there would be the same delay in responding. Maybe it's about the number of fishermen versus the number of people involved in farming, and it's a political calculation. But I genuinely believe the government's response is not at the level that's required, and it doesn't. Even the evidence today, and I looked at your statement today, Minister, and I read through it in advance, and I read a recent parliamentary question response again, and read it again, and I wrote down in both. There's no reference to market disturbance. There's no reference to huge drop in income. You know, it's not. It doesn't capture just how serious it is. It talks about sort of supports for capacity building and upgrading and stuff you do in vessels, ongoing stuff that was always there through Bordish Gawara. So I just would ask, just Minister, that you would reflect on that. I've got a few other questions, but I'm going to give way because colleagues are waiting here. But I'll come back at the end. But I just would ask that you would hear, and in fairness, like me, you represent a coastal community. It's what we've always known all our lives, surrounded by it. This is a really, really, I just don't get a sense that, and in the media, I'm going to say this too, and not just in government, in the media, there seems to be just a complete lack of awareness, or, like, I'm aware of these inshore fishermen have reached out to national media outlets and they didn't cover it, didn't want to know. I don't believe that would happen if it was in agriculture, in a sector of agriculture. So it's almost as if our fishing communities, our coastal communities, you know, in this island nation don't matter. But I don't exaggerate, and other deputies here who are engaging in the sector will confirm it. This is an unprecedented crisis. They desperately need financial assistance, every fisherman at this stage. I don't see that being on the table.
Thanks, Deputy McLaughlin. So listen, the opening statement that would have been provided in writing would have dealt with the topic at today's meeting, which was the Inshore strategy from 2019 to 2023. So that's what was asked to come in and discuss by the committee here, not the current state of fisheries. It was specifically on that. So the statement you'd have got would have been specifically dealing with that. Though you did see at the end of, when I finished dealing with that, I then dealt with what is the most urgent issue at the moment, which is the market situation, and outlined how I am finalising the details of a support for this year, which I hope to bring and announce in the next 2 to 3 weeks, understanding that is needed this year and that the sector is under particular pressure. In terms of the schemes and in terms of the spending of the Brexit funding, listen, I brought together all fisheries representatives into the Seafood Task Force to look at the terms of the Brexit Adjustment Reserve funding and to propose to me what schemes I could do to support every sector. And all fishing representatives were in that would have unanimously signed off on that task force report and put those proposals to me. And there were 16 schemes proposed, and I delivered on all 16 and delivered on them fully to the extent of funding which was requested as well. And one of those was the Inshore Business Adjustment Scheme, which, as I say, delivered €2,700 if you're under 10-metre boat, or 4,500 if you're under 18 metres in boat. And that was delivered last year and the year before. And to qualify, let's say if you were an under 18-metre boat, to qualify for that 4,700, you had to show that you were selling at least €1,000 fish in a year. So, like, that was the support, but there wasn't, and I had tasked all representatives themselves with giving me any ideas that could meet the criteria, and I did deliver in all 16 that came forward. Wish that there might have been other ways that the criteria could have been looser, but we tried to drain it and examine it and pull funding out as much of the sector in any way we could, and delivered on that. But then that was last year and the year before. This year now, as I say, I'll be coming forward the next 2 to 3 weeks with a support scheme for this year. Listen, that's not going to do away with the real bad market situation that's there, or the challenging income situation, but I certainly hope it'll be a help.
Okay, Deputy Ring.
Thanks, Minister. I read your report and also I read the response from BIM. In relation to the strategy that was set up, the strategy was set up and everybody thought this was going to be great for everybody, but it doesn't seem to have worked. And as the previous speaker has said, the inshore fishermen have really got a raw deal. And it really is when you see big boats coming into this country, sweeping up the fish, and there are small guys in rural Ireland not getting what they deserve. And in fairness to you, you have dealt with a lot of the issues that have been raised. You've tried to support them whatever way you can. But the biggest way you could support them is give these guys a bit more quota and let them go out and fish what they want to do. It's a hard job. It's a hard life. It's very difficult to make money out of it. And these are traditionally, this is the job they do. This is the only thing they know, and they want to stay in it. They actually want to stay in it. And I have to say that we have sacrificed the fishing industry for agriculture over the years. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's time, that these small guys got a break from the department. And there seemed to be a hole in the department over the last number of years, why they weren't prepared, particularly with the quota, why they weren't prepared to give some more quota to the small guy. I mean, a small bit of quota to the small guy would mean a lot to them, not like the big fishermen. We talked about the fuel crisis, and to be honest with you, I have raised it myself on a number of occasions with my own government ministers, why government have so many times have allowed this increase in fuel when we already had a problem with the price of fuel. And it may come back a small bit, but fuel is still very expensive. It's very dear, and it's creating a major problem. And in government level, I was surprised that you and my colleagues in my party didn't stop what was going on for the last 2 years. That was fine when the rules were brought in relation to the green issue, in relation to putting up fuel prices. That was fine when we weren't in a climate we are now. And the climate we're in now, we didn't have the war in Ukraine. We didn't have, when these people sat around committee meetings and decided they were going to put up fuel every few months. That's not the way to deal with small businesses. Small businesses and small fishermen are finding it very difficult. And I want to ask you a straight question. Is there any way that the department can give the small fishermen a bit more quota? And they have said themselves, if they get the quota and they don't use the quota, that they will give back the quota. But they won't do that because they'll work it. And that would be the best economic way to support them and help them, is to actually give them more quota. And I'm asking the question today. I know you have been asked, and I know you have rejected it, but I'm asking you to look at it again. Giving them a bit more mackerel quota, giving them a bit more quota. It's shocking to see big boats coming in from all over the world, sweeping up the fish that we have. And the few little lads and women in the inshore, and particularly in the small rural communities, not able to go out and get more quota, and quota that they could actually fish, quota that they could actually sell, and quota that they could make a bit of money on. And I'm asking you a straight question today. Would you reconsider giving them more quota? It's something that has been raised here on many occasions. It's been raised with me, other deputies, to try and see what can be done to get them. What's the resistance within the department to do this?
Thanks. Thanks, Deputy Ring. So listen, obviously, the national quota we have is fixed. It can go up and down each year for different stocks, depending on what the scientific advice is in terms of how much of a stock can be sustainably fished in that year without undermining its breeding and its future strength. But your actual percentage of what that stock is fixed at national level. And then also it has been fixed for many years as well in terms of the different segments, the size of the boat and etc. And important to that, more so than the size of the boat, has been the historic track record of different vessels as well. Listen, you're saying the resistance, the most resistance you'll meet actually will be within the fleet itself, because no more than at European level, it's hard, it's a challenged, a very difficult battle to get any change to quotas, because it requires 2/3 of member states to agree. At national level, it's fixed as well, and therefore, if one segment of and you make a very fair case for the inshore sector, if one segment is getting some more quota, then it means other segments of the fleet are giving up that quota at the same time, and obviously there's always resistance to that, no more than what you would expect. There has been some change in the last number of years to the mackerel share. A number of years ago, there was 400 tonne set aside of mackerel to be fished by hook and line, which is primarily the inshore fleet. And there was some reallocation, which incidentally is still the subject of a legal challenge in court, because it was contested by some fishers who didn't agree with the way it was allocated. But there has been requests made. It is something I'm looking at and is under consideration as to whether there's a case now for reconsidering the allocation of quota. Particularly last year, as a result of a long battle at European Council level in relation to securing extra mackerel quota, which had previously been fished by Denmark. We secured a permanent increase in mackerel quota, which is the first permanent increase we secured for many, I think, since the allocation keys were set in the early 80s. That obviously doesn't negate the impact of Brexit, certainly not, but it was a permanent increase on where we were at the year before. And on the back of that, the inshore sector in particular saying, well, listen, since we've got that bit extra, can we look again at whether the 400 tonne for the hook and line could be increased or not? So listen, that's something that I continue to consider. But I take your point and your advocacy, and I know in particular in Mayo that hook and line fishery has been particularly important because it's the area where it has been most actively fished. And then listen, in relation to the fuel costs, you make the valid point there. For marine gas oil generally, there isn't any revenue. There's no tax. There's no tax on it. There's no revenue on it other than that, which is reclaimable. So it's not like other fuels whereby there's excise. There's no excise in marine gas oil. But for some in the inshore sector whereby they're not using marine gas oil, that's an issue, and I accept that. And you know, the two schemes that ran last year was a way of trying to get additional income to them to reflect the additional pressures that were there. But I take your point and your advocacy in relation to that.
Well, just again in relation to the quota, I'm glad to hear that you're going to review that, and it's fine, you know. And I was here, and I'm here long enough to remember when the quota was given out to the big fishermen and the big boats at the time, and I remember the controversy and where it went and where it didn't go, and the allegations and everything else that was made. But to be fair, a small quota for the inshore guys would make an awful difference. I mean, for the big boats there, they have enough of quota as far as I'm concerned, and I know they'll disagree with me, but we're trying to keep rural Ireland alive. We're trying to keep jobs in that sector. We're trying to keep people alive in rural Ireland. And to be fair to you, as I say, when some of the stuff that came up from the task force, you dealt with it, and you were, you know, and I think the one thing you could do, and I think it would send out a very strong message, if you really gave a small bit of quota to the small inshore guys. I think it would be the one strong message that would come out. It would show that this strategy was working. It would show that you were listening. And to be fair, you are listening, because I know you come from the same as myself in Donegal, you have the same problems. And I'm asking you to look at that quota again. It would really make a massive difference to these small guys if they got a bit more quota. And they would fish it, and they would use it. And they have said very clearly, if they didn't use it and didn't use the quota, they would give it back. And I think you should give them the tester now. Give them the bit of quota, give them the chance to survive, and I hope that that's something that you will do, because, as I say, the bigger boats, the bigger fishermen, it's like big businesses, like everything else. The bigger guys will always survive. The smaller guys need help and support, and they need more help now than they ever needed it before. They've suffered over the last number of years between Brexit, between, as you said yourself, between COVID, and now the fuel and the energy crisis that's out there. It is hurting them big time. And I'd like, if you'd look at the quota, it's the one issue that I'd ask you here this evening, to try and deal with the quota.
Deputy Creed.
Okay. Deputy Biden.
Thank you much. Thank you, Minister. Assistance. Look at, I'm listening to what you're saying, but the one word coming across to me the whole time is you're considering. Everything has been considered. In 2022, the shrimp market gone. In 2023, the crab market went on the floor. Then, within a month, the pollock was gone. Like, this is serious stuff for these. This is how they make these people make their living. We can't emphasise more. Myself and Padraig were down in Kilmore meeting the inshore fishermen, and a fisherman he wrote a letter to us, and it was heart-rending. His friend had sent him a letter saying, "Listen, I'm picking out what coffin I'm going to go down in because I'm gone. I can't survive anymore. I can't fish." That's the seriousness of this situation. You spoke about the fuel, but I can't say anything wrong with giving a subsidy to the fuel, in the sense that you can put a time limit on it. You can say it's for 6 months, it's for 9 months, and that's it. These people need. Is there going to be a compensation scheme? Is there going to be a compensation scheme? Not all this stuff that's going on, little bits, tits in here, there, and there, tidbits here and there. These people are in a serious situation, and we've met them, and it's like they're in trouble. They're really in trouble. And I know, Minister, you're not responsible for the market, but the market is actually gone. Like for instance, the lobster in May was 32 euro a kilo. It's 14.50 now. I mean, any other industry, you can't sustain that. That's completely unsustainable. You will not make a profit out of it. You will not feed your family from it. So I just wonder, like, what is the situation? And you mentioned the bar, right? Like, the inshore fishermen are almost excluded from the bar. And when you're talking about the bar, there was 120 million returned, not unspent. And yet we have this situation here now, so I'd just like to maybe make a few statements on that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mathan. So, listen, when I said I was considering, I was specifically referring to Deputy Ring's request for a review of mackerel fish allocation. And what I said there was that I was considering that, I had received requests and considering that. In relation to the need for some support for the inshore sector, what I said is that I'm finalising the details of a scheme in relation to that, and which I plan to make an announcement on the next 2 to 3 weeks, because I recognise the pressure the sector is under, and you've outlined that clearly too. And you've also clearly outlined that it is very much market related, and you've outlined prices there which are halved in that instance. And as you know, no matter what sector you're working in, you can't mitigate that as a government, but it is important that we try and support them where we can, and that's what I'm looking to see, to finalise what can be done there in relation to that. But there's no doubt, and there's no getting away from the fact that has been a really difficult number of months, and income has been absolutely hammered in the sector. Listen, in relation to the wider issue, you mentioned the pollock. I have worked in every way possible to try and support the sector in terms of reopening fisheries as well. Obviously, pollock was closed this year for the first time in a long time on scientific advice. But we have, over the last 2-3 years, seen a couple of fisheries reopened for the first time. Spur dog was reopened, which the sector had significant hopes for, but has proven challenging to identify market opportunities for it. But we have succeeded in getting it reopened. And then also northwest herring has been reopened to a commercial fishery as well for the first time. And that has followed on from significant steps taken by all in the industry to try and see the stocks rebuilt. And that's something we have to try and build on too. But you mentioned in relation to the Brexit Adjustment Reserve and inshore fishermen being excluded from that. Listen, the inshore representatives were fully part of the looking at what was possible under the Brexit Adjustment Reserve to propose schemes. And as I say, every suggestion that came to me, I followed through on and implemented. And there isn't any, I didn't get anything from any party or anybody here either, a proposal as to what I could do with the Brexit Adjustment Reserve that I didn't, there wasn't any came forward from anyone. But I put everybody into the one room with the task of look at this funding, find any ideas you can, any schemes that will fit the terms and criteria of it, and come to me and I will seek to implement it. And I did that, all 16, and everybody in the industry would have been part of that. But the challenge for the inshore sector was that for many of the smaller boats that didn't have quotas and fished non-quota species, it was much more challenging to be able to identify ways to spend the Brexit Adjustment Reserve on them. And for crab and lobster in particular, which is the bread and butter of the smaller boats, there's no quotas in those. You can fish, you can catch, as long as you have a license, you can catch as much as you can. So therefore, Brexit didn't impact on lobster or crab because it didn't impact on their quota directly. But we did run those two schemes, business adjustment schemes, to try to get funding to them. But the challenge was because they weren't directly quota-related species, it was more challenging to make the Brexit Adjustment Reserve match or find ways of getting funding to them. So for those inshore boats which did fish the likes of pollock or other quota species, they were able to avail of the tie-up schemes under Brexit Adjustment Reserve. But if you didn't have any quota, if you fished non-quota species such as crab or lobster, then there wasn't any tie-up because there was no change to your quota as such. And that brings other challenges in terms of whenever you don't have quotas, how do you manage stocks sustainably to make sure you're not, that you're fishing them in a sensible way to make sure that they don't get depleted. And that's one of the challenges in the inshore at the moment, that because there's less other species, because, for example, northwest herring was closed for a long time, spur dog, which had been a traditional species, was closed. Thankfully, though, both of those are reopened. But, say, pollock, now closed this year. And salmon, obviously, was a massive for the inshore, and that's been gone a long time, and that was closed. Once they were closed, then, naturally, the gravitation then of all of those boats who would have traditionally fished salmon, for example, and given the likes of lobster and crab a rest when they were doing that, those boats now there's more pressure on the likes of crab and lobster stocks because they are the only stocks available to fish. And that's something we have to keep a close eye on too, because we don't want to see those stocks depleted in a way that means that they don't become sustainable. But that's just the background to the bar funding piece there.
Yeah, just look on the salmon and all, like most of the things you mentioned there, the problem is that, Minister, is that they're seasonal. And if you miss a season, you can't go back again. So that's a major issue here. That's what we're really wanting to get across. And it's the speed of the thing that's going to matter. I mean, we can't reiterate enough of how like it's on its knees, and people are like. I suspect that it's, as Padraig mentioned, the 642 boats. I'd say if you look into those, a lot of them are for sale. These people they've nowhere to go. They've only a boat, that's all they have, and they have to sell it. And that's the situation. And it's really, we can't emphasise enough the situation that they're in. I mean, please, if you can just speed up the whole thing, because it's really, it's also a national asset, like, as well. Our quotas are national assets. So thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And just so the estimate is, out of the 1,600 or so inshore boats on the National Register, that probably about 1,000 are active. But I think a good benchmark is the number that applied for the two schemes last year and the year before, which was around 800. And the threshold for qualifying was €1,000 of fish sold in a year. And say it was a good either 2,700 or €4,500 available if you applied for that. So I think it's probably fair to assume that out of the 1,600, there's just under 800 applied for it. So you could take it that the other 800 are, I think it's a fair assumption, fishing either less than 30 days or didn't fish up to €1,000 of total sales in a year. So they would be either not fishing or fishing very, very small amounts.
Yeah, thanks, Minister, for coming in, and to your officials, thanks. I'm no expert on this by any means, but a few people would have got on to us. And one of the questions is, and look, you might have gone through this because I haven't been in at the beginning of it. Was the inshore sector paid any form of compensation out of the Brexit Adjustment Scheme?
No, the tie-up scheme was available to the inshore sector, where they had quota, and where they had quota for Brexit-affected species. But then for crab and lobster, which would have been the bread and butter in terms of the fish that's fished by the inshore sector, they're non-quota species, so they weren't impacted by Brexit in relation to quota. I did run those two schemes, which I've outlined a couple of times in relation to the 2,700 for under 10 metre boats and the 4,500 for 10 to 18 metres. But there was tie-up schemes available for the whitefish fleet, for whitefish quota. There was tie-up available for those. There was also a decommissioning scheme available for those boats for the whitefish fleet. Again, that was recommended to me by the task force. And the way the decommissioning worked was that while the level of quota stayed the same, adjusted for Brexit, by decommissioning a number of boats, those boats came out of the system, and it meant then that the remaining boats got to utilise the quota that was there. So it kept their quota in a sustainable position. So that's how the whitefish fleet were addressed under the Brexit Adjustment Reserve. And then in the pelagic fleet, which is your mackerel, your horse mackerel, and your blue whiting, that fleet, which is the much larger boats, there was no decommissioning scheme recommended for those boats, but there was a liquidity scheme recommended for them. So there was liquidity funding paid to those.
Okay, they would say, the reps would argue that when they be having talks with you about trying to get monies or discussions, my understanding is, were they told that they couldn't get compensation under the BAR scheme, and they would contend that other groups were able to get money under that? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, it would have been all dealt with within the Seafood Task Force, looking at the criteria that was there under the Brexit Adjustment Reserve. And as I say, you had sort of the three segments. You had the inshore fleet, which doesn't have any quota, and therefore didn't lose quota, and that's the smaller boats. You had the middle segment, where there was decommissioning and tie-up, and then you had the larger segment, where there was liquidity, in recognition of the fact that, for example, in relation to mackerel, we lost 25% of our national quota in mackerel. And again, that was all fully considered as part of the task force as to what would qualify for the Brexit Adjustment Reserve. And listen, there's no doubt that boats in the middle segment, the whitefish fleet, and in the pelagic sector, the larger sector, would have got a lot more Brexit funding, because they were fishing fish which were quota species and would have seen quota permanently cut. But when you come to the inshore sector, which is primarily based on non-quota species, crab and lobster, there wasn't any basis for paying funding directly there, because it didn't impact. You could catch as much as you could catch there, as long as it was available.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, I hear that. A couple of questions here. Obviously, we would be engaging the inshore sector in advance. Minister, brown crab working group, is there any, what's the status of that? I'm advised it hasn't been established yet. Can that be?
Yeah, that's correct, Deputy McLaughlin, and that should have been established by now, but I've asked Board Iskewara to expedite its establishment. It's an important piece of work, and absolutely accept that it hasn't been, it should have been. It's fair to expect that work would have been well expedited by now. But I've been seeking that would actually get set up and organised very quickly.
There's a couple of bodies that representation. So the SFPA Consultative Committee, they're not on that yet. This is the inshore sector. Celtic Herring Committee. Then there's, as you'll know, there's issues with the Northwest Herring Committee and conflict there, which hopefully can be resolved. I mean, one of the things which I think we all want to see is to minimise conflict within the fisheries sector, and to try to get agreement. I mean, the point's been raised earlier about quota, and there's no doubt that the inshore sector need to get a bigger share of the likes of mackerel quota, herring quota, no doubt about it. But you want to do it in a way that is agreed. And then, of course, you want to unite the industry to try and secure more fish at European level in terms of the common fisheries policy. So there's two objectives that I think need to be shared. Just maybe if you could just talk about your vision in terms of how we can include Inshore in all of those forums, give them their fair place at the table and get fairness.
I'll check where we're at with the SFPA Consultative Committee and revert you directly on that, Deputy McLaughlin. As I said to, I think it was Deputy Mython earlier in relation to the Celtic Sea, or it was Deputy Collins, Celtic Sea Herring Committee, I have a request for Inshore representation there, which I will be in touch with them in relation to, and I take your representations and advocacy here in relation to them as well on board. Listen, more broadly then, I agree the more consideration and thought can be given as to how quota is used as best possible is the right way forward. Generally that actually works very effectively because each month there's a like what's known in short as the QMAC, which is the Quota Management Committee, and that has all of the fishing representatives on it, and my department services that committee. And it decides every month how to share out and how to manage our national quota, to manage it in a way that tries to keep boats as active as possible over the course of the year. And generally, you know, it's a place for thorough discussion and generally consensus as much as possible. That then comes to me for sign-off. And throughout the 4 years, there's been some times where it's come to me where there's been differing views, and where that's the case I make a call, but that's a minority of times. Certainly throughout the 4 years I've been Minister, there's only been one occasion where I haven't gone, and I have gone against the view of the QMAC, and that's where legal advice meant that I couldn't go with what was being recommended. So that shows you that generally it works in a collaborative way in terms of the management of the quota. Of course, everybody would like to have more, but in terms of managing what we have, that approach is taken. In relation to the North West Herring Committee, then, which the advisory committee, there's been challenges there. I want to try and work through those. A couple of organisations have left that, but I want to try and get everybody back together to find as collaborative a way forward in terms of how we manage that fishery now that it's a good news story and that it's reopened after hard work by people to try and rebuild the stocks. There is some disagreement in terms of how it will be managed, but I want to try and get people back together to advise me on that.
So two final issues, Chairman, and thanks for forbearance. I've been asked, there was a safety grant and money was taken back. Just maybe get clarification of that. If that makes sense, that's what I've been, just one question. And final question then is around the issue of bottom mussel seed. So basically, the sector itself has zero mussel seed available, and that means that you'll have zero sales in the year ahead. So just now, if you don't have the ready-made answer on that, maybe just come back to me on it. I appreciate that's not specific to what you're here to talk about today, but.
Okay. So listen, on the safety grant, I'll have to take that one away because I'm not quite sure what's being referred to there. On the bottom mussel seed, my understanding is that the surveys have shown there isn't sufficient mussel seed there this year to harvest. So that is something that has happened in different times, and I believe that's the advice there. So it's not unusual. It does have to be surveyed every year to see if there is the mussel seed there to actually harvest in any given year.
Okay, well, sure, listen, I might come back to you with a parliamentary question with more specifics of it. So thanks, that's fine enough from us, right?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I apologise to the Minister for missing your presentation. I got caught in another meeting, and I'd like to welcome your officials. Minister, I'll be very brief with just one minor question to ask. It's about infrastructure, to make sure that inshore fishing has the infrastructure that's required to make sure we're going to be suitable as an entity moving forward. I raised issues below in Casttown Bay at the moment, where there's a conflict between where we have the ability for inshore fishermen to actually get access to the actual appropriate pontoon or pier which is appropriate. A pontoon has been taken away there in the last few months. There's no pontoon available. there is a clash and an issue there about trying to make sure that inshore fishermen can safely actually get their fish onto the actual shore itself. I've been talking to you and your officials about this issue, and I very much are aware that you're involved. But I do think we need to get some kind of understanding of how they can actually work together, the big fish fleets and the inshore fishermen itself. Power is another issue. That's an issue below in the harbour itself. Inshore fishing fleet now have an issue of trying to get power to make sure their fleet is actually powered. So I'm just worried about the actual infrastructure. You left this meeting a few months ago to go down to Castletownbere for a multi-million-euro investment, which I absolutely fully welcome. I just believe we need to have maybe an investment policy about trying to make sure that inshore fishermen have the same access to actually the infrastructure required so they can be sustainable going forward. So you might give me your view about how we can actually have a shared space that can work well for both sides of this argument. It's a significant issue. I'm fearful, and I've met the fishermen down there, they are fearful of the safety issues that are there at the moment. So you might give me, at some stage, not today now, if you don't have the answer, an update on how we actually can try and progress this issue itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Lombard. Yeah, I'll come back to you with a response directly in this. There is harbour user forums in each of the fishery harbour centres to try and discuss and consult on how best to use the facilities in place. But I'll certainly come back to you directly with a specific response on the issue you raise here.
Thank you, and thank your officials.
Okay, Minister, I'd like to thank you for coming in today and giving us an update on where the strategy is at. And I think it is obvious from the discussion that inshore fishermen are under an awful lot of financial pressure, and hopefully their times will improve. The next public meeting in the committee is on Wednesday, 26th of June at 5:30 p.m. and the committee will examine the welfare and treatment of horses and their traceability. As there are no further matters for discussion, today's meeting now stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone.